You're listening to the Mind Over Murder podcast.
My name is Bill Thomas. I'm a writer, consulting producer, and now podcaster. I am now trying to use my experience as the brother of a murder victim to help other victims of violent crime. I'm working on a book on the unsolved Colonial Parkway Murders, and I'm the co-administrator of the Colonial Parkway Murders Facebook group, together with Kristin Dilley.
My name is Kristin Dilley. I'm a writer, a researcher, a teacher, and a victims advocate, as well as the social media manager and co-administrator for the Colonial Parkway Murders Facebook page with my partner in crime, Bill Thomas. Welcome to Mind Over Murder. I'm Kristin Dilley.
And I'm Bill Thomas.
And we are so thrilled to be joined today by Janette Edwards Santiago. She is the sister of Robin Edwards. And we are thrilled, Janette, as always, to have you come talk to us. We don't get to talk to you terribly often on air, so thank you for taking the time to join us today.
Most definitely.
I think about something, Janette, which is we've talked many times privately about what was going on with the case and how things were with your family, both of our intense desire to see the case move forward. But it wasn't always on the air. As a matter of fact, most times it wasn't. So it's actually an interesting dynamic to talk about some of this stuff on the air here at Mind Over Murder. Thank you for doing that.
You're welcome.
It occurred to me the other day when I was talking to Bill that as we enter, I hate to put it this way, but it is what it is, Parkway anniversary season, because the Phelps-Lauer case happens in the late August, and then Robin and David's, and then Kathy and Becky's. It occurred to me that this was going to be the first year where we have had an answer in one of our cases. I told Bill we absolutely have got to get Janette on the phone to talk a little bit about this, because this is the first time that any of the families here have answers. We just wanted to get your thoughts on that. This is the first year, September 19th, that you'll have a definitive answer as to what happened to Robin and David. How do you feel about that?
It's weird. I hadn't actually thought about that fact. So it's a little weird.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about what has transpired. Let's roll back a little bit. When did you find out that a suspect had been identified in Robin and David's case?
Early January 2024.
And was that just before the big press conference on January 8th?
Yep. It was the Thursday before I found out.
Had your Virginia State Police case agent, had he given you the heads up that something was coming? How did they let you know we have news and we want to talk to you and your family about it?
He reached out to us, me specifically, wanted to meet with my mom and myself as soon as possible. So, of course, that kind of had me a little scared and worried. And he came over the next evening after I got off work and met with me and my mom. And that was not what I was expecting to hear.
Did he get right into it? The two of you, obviously, you and your mom are probably apprehensive. Did he cut to the chase without a long buildup? How does he phrase it?
He kind of explained how the investigation had taken and about the DNA and how they had submitted it and just the whole process of basically the last year building up to getting a definitive suspect. And just he explained it and he said, we have identified him. And wow. At that point, everything went black. It kind of stopped making sense for a moment. And then he had pictures of him and pictures of his truck. And so it was just, it was weird, to say the least. That was I expected maybe we have advances in DNA or we have a suspect, but no concrete. That's the kind of stuff I was expecting because that's what we've gotten over the years.
Yeah.
So for it to have been solved was mind-boggling. I called my sister who lives in Missouri, and I couldn't even tell her. I just said, here, you have to talk to the police officer. And I handed him the phone.
Your investigator was still there when you were telling your sister.
Yes.
I'm trying to picture this. Is this at your house? Your mom's house?
Yeah, my house.
Are you sitting on the couch, or are you at the coffee table? How's this work?
Yeah, we're sitting in the den on the couch, and he's on the other couch, and he's showing us the pictures and explaining the process and what they had been through earlier that day and how it came to making sure he got over to see us that particular day. So it's all surreal still.
I can imagine. Yeah. Now, would this have been a couple of days before the public press conference, which was on January 8th, 2024? Yes. So this is a few days prior to that?
Yes.
Were they concerned about leaks, about this getting out into the media before they were ready to announce it?
Yes. They asked us not to tell anybody outside of the immediate family because of the press release, and let us know that how that was going to work and that they were going to do that on, I believe that was a Monday. My sister and her husband actually drove from Missouri.
Oh, they did? I don't think I knew that.
Yep. They drove.
Did they request for you to be at the press conference, or did you request to be there?
I think it was both. I think that we were given the choice, and I told him that basically there was no way in hell that I was going to miss it. So.
Sure. I remember turning on the live feed and seeing you standing there. And that was the first of many times that day that I started to cry.
We've had it described to us that there was a briefing with the families. Did they brief you again with members of the Edwards, Knobling, Call, and Hailey families together?
No.
Oh, so they were done separately. So in other words, we did the Edwards family and then the Knoblings
together.
So it was all done separately. How long would you say you met with your investigator for?
That Thursday night, he was with us for about an hour.
Knowing you pretty well, you work in the medical field, you've learned a fair amount about DNA and how forensics testing works. I know you're always a person that has a lot of questions. Were you able to get to the place where you're able to ask questions, or were you still just dealing with this incredible news, which had to be shocking and emotional? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was able to ask the questions that came to my brain at that time.
Right.
And my mom, of course, had her own questions. He spent as much time as we needed him to be there. He was very compassionate and very thorough and answered anything we questioned. So it was even, in a weird way, a bonding moment.
Yeah.
Sure.
I had always been very impressed with him as an investigator and as a human being, and I know you dealt with him more often than I did. He struck me as a sharp, young investigator. I've said to Kristin, he's a go-getter. This is the way It felt when we talked to him maybe a year before that he really wanted to see this case move forward, and it was determined to see it through.
Yes, and you could tell it was very personal to him.
When you talked to your case agent, did he also mention Teresa Howell and her family? Was that the first that you'd heard of her name, or were you familiar with her case?
Nope. The first I've ever heard of her was that day.
And then did you ever meet Teresa Howell's family?
Yes, at the press conference.
Speaking of the press conference, by the way, were they things they asked you to say or not say at the press conference?
We decided as a family, because I know myself when my emotions get high, I tend to not be able to express myself. I cry more and almost hyperventilate in those situations, and especially you talking about having cameras at you and reporters. So we sat down with the state police and wrote out a statement from us, and the Knoblings added what they wanted to add, and we decided as an entire group that we weren't going to speak. They gave us the opportunity that we could have spoken, but we all decided that emotions were too high and that it wouldn't have been pretty.
Was that the first time you'd ever heard Alan Wade Wilmer Sr.'s name?
Yep.
How much information did they give you about him? Did they just say he's the perpetrator and here's what we know about him? Or how much did you learn?
We learned that he had a shrimp boat and that he did a lot of fishing and that he had a blue pickup truck and that he lived over on the eastern shore, but he was frequently on this side of the water in the Newport News, Yorktown kind of area. And then he explained how his DNA became part of the system and how in his death, the DNA was submitted and entered into the system. So he explained that whole point of events from the neighbor calling and having people go to the house because of the funny smell coming from the house and them finding him deceased, to the DNA and how that was uploaded and what made them run the DNA against his. So it was a lot of information in that short amount of time.
Can you expand on that a little bit? When you say ran the DNA against his, did they say why they had done that?
And again, my recognition of exactly how it unfolded was emotional at that time. But I guess from my understanding, he had been on the radar before. And one of the other investigators had been looking at him for some of the other cases and was in touch with our agent and made a suggestion. And that's, from what I remember, how that transpired.
Did they give you any indication of when that took place?
About a year. I want to say it was summer of 2023. That's the date that's sticking out in my head. Now, I could be totally wrong because, like I said, I was half hearing and half comprehending everything we talked about.
It's got to be overwhelming. That summer 2023 is what we've been told as well, is that the identification took place a couple of months prior to the announcement. One of the questions that's come up a lot, Janette, and I don't know if you know the answer, Wilmer had this boat. He's a waterman, as you mentioned. He also had the blue truck that was in the pictures as well as access to other vehicles. Did they ever give you a clear idea of how they thought he got to the Ragged Island site? Did he come there by boat or by vehicle?
They never definitively said, even in theory.
So they didn't venture a guess or a theory about things like that?
No.
And then did they mention, as Kristin asked, did they mention Teresa Howell at that meeting at your family's home? Did they say, and there's another victim?
Yes.
And how much information did they provide you on the Teresa Howell case, which is obviously new to you?
Just her name when she was killed and the way she was killed with the similarities to Robin and David's case, but nothing really more than that.
And then at that point, I know obviously your investigator can't speak to the various FBI cases. Were you in any way aware that at that point he had also been looked at for Keith Call and Sandy Hailey?
Not at that time, no. Now, they did indicate that they were not. I want to say that it was mentioned that it cannot be ruled out that there's involvement in any other case. I think that was almost the statement that was made, but no specifics to any particular case. But at that time, me and my mom even said we wouldn't be shocked if he was responsible for more cases. And truly, I'm shocked at this point that we haven't heard of more victims, not only just in our cases, but elsewhere. I halfway expected that they would start popping up, well, he's responsible for this one, and I am shocked that hasn't happened.
I still think it's going to. I think at some point or another there is going to be more, and they'll have to start naming them. But I think it's probably still a while off. But yeah, I agree with you, Janette. I'm surprised it's taken this long for them to say, oh, and also this one and this one.
Yes.
I want to ask you to jump back in time with me for a minute, Janette. I recall it's well over a year ago. It could be even 2 years ago, that the Virginia State Police investigator had spoken to you about his desire and his team's desire to do advanced forensic testing on the rape kit. At the time, he told us there was a concern at the Virginia Department of Forensic Science, those are the folks that run the lab, that the testing that they might do might use the last of the DNA that was left. As I recall, tests have been done to that evidence over the years, but some of those early tests consumed the DNA. You and I had gotten word that testing was being conducted, and he expressed some concern that the testing might use the remaining small amount of highly degraded DNA. And I remember talking to you about this, and you and I had the same attitude. Now, obviously, Robin's not my sister. She's yours. But I remember you saying something like, no time like the present, or if this is the last best shot we've got, we should move forward with this.
Yes.
Did he reference those earlier conversations, which had been at least a year before?
No, we didn't talk about that. Again, half my brain working at that time, all those questions didn't come to mind until way later. It's crazy to look back and go back in time to all that.
Did he ever circle back with you? In other words, have you spoken to your case agent since that January timeframe?
No. And my daughter, Robin, is wanting to know more about what was found when they went into his home. She's curious as to, did he, like some serial killers, did he keep mementos? Did he keep souvenirs, if you will? Really curious about that part of the investigation. So I do need to reach out to, because I'd like to know.
Does it bother you that Wilmer cannot be punished for his crimes at this point because he died well ahead of time? Does that bother you at all, or is that just not even on your mind right now?
Yes and no. There's some time that I was angry for a little while that he died without being punished. But then also part of me is glad that he died, because without him dying in the manner in which he did, his DNA probably wouldn't have been on file. And we might never have been to this point had he just become an old man and died in a nursing home or in a hospital somewhere.
No, it's a good point. I'd never thought about it in those terms. Him dying alone at home and not being identified right away resulted in them, law enforcement, testing his DNA to confirm that this person was him. I never thought about it from that point of view, but you're right. If he hadn't died in that manner, alone at home, he might never have been tested for DNA.
Right.
Now, do you feel that the testing that we discussed a second ago that was done months or even a year back that your case agent talked to us about, do you feel like that testing led to this connection between Wilmer and the evidence?
Yes.
So do you feel like they listened to you? I remember you saying, look, if this is our last best shot, let's take it. Did you feel like you were listened to?
Yeah, I do.
Good. That's got to feel good.
You're listening to Mind Over Murder. We'll be right back after this word from our sponsors. We're back here at Mind Over Murder. Before we get back to the podcast, just wanted to remind you that we have a GoFundMe effort going on right now. This campaign is designed to help us raise funds to help promote Mind Over Murder and specifically to push the Colonial Parkway Murders investigation forward. We'd love it if you could support us in any way that you can. Any donation from $5 to whatever you can afford is very much appreciated and will be incredibly helpful. The link is in the show notes and in our social media pages. As always, thanks for your support. Now back to Mind Over Murder. How often, if ever, would you talk to the members of the Knobling family? Is that a conversation that happens or doesn't happen?
It doesn't really happen. I am friends with Michael on Facebook, and I get to follow his life, and to actually really sit down with them, that hasn't happened since Carl passed.
And Carl's the father who passed away a couple of years ago.
Yes.
One of my small regrets in this case is I've obviously met most of the people involved, but I never met Carl. He struck me as a real character.
He was.
Everything I've heard.
He had such a good heart, too. He was very compassionate. When our families used to get together on the holidays and stuff, we would go over to their house. I remember we went swimming at their pool a couple of times, and he was always so caring, always worried about my mom.
Oh, it's very sweet.
He was a good guy.
So do you feel like Carl, the dad, was the catalyst for some of those get-togethers?
Yes, I do.
Everything we've heard about him and read about him, and of course we talked to family members, he just sounds like such a wonderful guy. Watching him on video and interviews, he had a Southern Santa Claus vibe going on. And he just seemed like such a sweet, kind man and just a character. I can't think of another word.
You were talking about this sense of how everything felt surreal, and I can really only imagine how surreal that must have been. In the months since, how are things feeling now? Are you guys adapting to the news? Is life returning to normal? I imagine that for the first couple of weeks, when people started getting updates, you were probably inundated with a lot of media, calls from family, friends, and stuff like that.
Just family, friends. The media actually left us alone, and
oh, wow.
I was really shocked. I halfway expected for my phone to be like blowing up. I did do an interview with one of the local stations here, and
WAVY, right?
Yes.
I actually remember watching that on TV. Actually, the day I was in the hospital with my boyfriend, he'd had to go to the emergency room, and I looked up in the corner of the TV at Mary Immaculate, and there you were. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to go catch that somehow. But I do remember seeing you on WAVY.
So that's the only interview that I have done since then.
Was that something that you and your mom and your sister, you wanted to step back from? That wasn't something...
At the day of the press conference, yes. But I would have been open for questions and stuff after we had time to process. That's why I didn't do that interview right away. My mom absolutely refused. She didn't want to be in the public spotlight anymore. I was okay with talking about it at that time, and it was a good time to do the interview.
And how about now? Some months have gone by. How are you feeling about things in general?
Depends on the day.
Sure.
I get it.
Depends on the day. I can be totally fine talking about it and talking to people that I don't see every day or talk to every day about it. And there'll be a time where somebody asks me a question and it's instant tears. And so it depends on the day.
And I realized that I made you cry with the very first question that I asked you, and I'm so sorry about that.
That's okay.
But I can imagine surreal still being the adjective that applies to this situation. I can't even imagine what that's like to suddenly have answers after all these years. Would you say that finding out about what actually happened to Robin and David, has that improved your life?
It's made me be able to relax in the fact that he can't hurt anybody else. It's made me not fear society less, but my girls will tell you as they became teenagers, starting to get 13, nearing 14, I was a helicopter mom. I need to know where you are, what you're doing, who are you with, where are you going. I need to know everything because of this incident. And I've been that way with my girls and my granddaughters and even my grandsons. So the relief of knowing that there's not a person out there that's going to target any other family members has almost been a relief, if you will. So that has been helpful.
You're kind of a weight off your shoulders.
Yes.
And it's a long time to carry that weight, too.
Yeah.
How does Robin, your daughter's curiosity, manifest itself? Is she starting to ask questions?
Yes. Now that she's finished with nursing school.
Wow. That's exciting.
Yeah, she's got a little more time, not that you have time with 2 toddlers. So she's asking questions. Hey, did you ever hear anymore? What's going on with that? Can you find out? So, and she's the kind of person where if she gets something in her head, it's not going to rest until she gets that answer.
And so that might bring about a phone call from you to your investigator to check in.
Yeah, she actually mentioned it this morning.
Oh, that's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And maybe with some time having elapsed since the original news back in January, but it's obviously still on her mind.
Yes.
Her kids are little. They wouldn't understand any of this conversation.
Correct.
Does it feel good that your daughter followed you into the medical field? You both work in medicine.
Yeah, I have 2 nurses. 2 of my daughters are nurses.
My mom was a nurse, too, so I have a real soft spot for people that work in the medical field, and I think it's incredibly important. So are they both practicing now? You mentioned Robin has young kids.
Yeah, she works in the hospital here in Newport News, and so does my oldest daughter. And Robin is actually back in school to get her RN now. She's got her LPN, and now she's going for her RN.
Good for her.
So she's
great.
Working and going to school and raising 2 boys.
That sounds like a full life.
It's
Yes.
a very full life.
Yes.
This has been such a long time coming for you guys, and I'm so happy. Whoops, I'm getting a little choked up too.
Yeah.
I'm so happy for you guys, but it took a while for it to get to this point for you all to have answers. We know that there are families out there, some of them still Colonial Parkway Murders families, who are waiting for answers. What would you say to families that are still waiting for answers in their loved ones' cases, especially if it's a long wait like y'all's was?
Never give up hope. When you least expect it, it could be the break that we've needed. I've always said since we were classified as the Colonial Parkway Murders, that even if one case got solved, it would be a win for all of us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've said the same thing.
I never imagined that it would be our case that was solved first, and I say first, but had it been one of the other cases, I still would have felt the same way, that it was a win for all of us.
I could not agree more. We're so thrilled for you. I can ask you this question. When you've been looking for answers for as long as you have, now that you've had some time to process, and maybe this will take the rest of your life to totally figure this out, Do you regard this news as good news?
Mostly, yes. I always wanted my mom to be laid to rest with the fact of knowing who killed my sister. And that has happened, getting up in age. And I was scared because my dad passed away before we got any kind of closure. I did not want that to be the same case for my mom. So, mostly yes.
And your mom's attitude towards this, is it similar?
Yes. She said nothing can bring her back, of course, but knowing that he can't hurt anybody else is the biggest plus in her book.
Well, Janette,
Right.
I've been muting myself because I'm crying and I just can't seem to stop.
All right.
I'm so sorry. It's all happy tears. But wow, I did not foresee myself getting this emotional. Janette, we're so thrilled for you. Really, we are. And it has been such a pleasure being able to talk to you today about this, because this really is, as I said at the top, this is the first anniversary where we have answers, and we consider that a win, all of us. So thank you for joining us and for being willing to talk to us about it, even though I know I made you cry a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad I did it. I'm glad that we've gotten to talk, and it helps my soul.
Thank you so much, Janette. We really appreciate you, and we love you very much.
Love y'all guys too.
That is going to do it for this episode of Mind Over Murder. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next time.
Mind Over Murder is a production of Absolute Zero and Another Dog Productions.
Our executive producers are Bill Thomas and Kristin Dilley.
Our logo art is by Pamela Arnois.
Our theme music is by Kevin MacLeod.
Mind Over Murder is distributed in partnership with Crawlspace Media.
You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram.
You can also follow our page on the Colonial Parkway Murders on Facebook.
And finally, you can follow Bill Thomas on Twitter at BillThomas56.
Thank you for listening to Mind Over Murder.